We need news reporting that puts the people as its top priority, not the government, not the corporations. And that's where independent world television and the real news come in.
Welcome back to the next segment of our interview with Sabah al-Nasseri, professor of political science, York University in Toronto, and an expert on Middle East politics. Welcome, Sabah. So, in previous interviews, you've described the situation in Iraq essentially as a competing sections of the Iraqi elite with tribal base, ethnic base, but essentially sections of the elite fighting for this massive oil wealth and political power.
Exactly.
And that the U.S. has picked essentially their horse, represented by Maliki, which represents one section of the elite. Its militia gets to be called the Iraqi army. But who are the other forces, and what do they want? If I'm understanding it correctly, what they want is the Americans to get out of the way and let the Iraqis decide and fight amongst themselves to some extent about who's going to be in power in Iraq.
Exactly. And if you look at let's take the so-called Shiite community, nominally a Shiite community. The al-Maliki and al-Hakim government thought that being Shiite or Shiite political parties, they can represent the majority of the Shiite communities in Iraq. But they realized this is only illusion. It's not true, because the majority of the Shiites are, some of them are secularist, liberal, whatever. And a lot of them, especially the poor of them, the unemployed, the working class, and so on, and peasant, were backing up al-Sadr movement. He's also Shiite from the ruling Allied, but he had always kind of connection to the subaltern classes in Iraq. In this sense, you have internal struggles between these Shiite allies of the ruling class over political power and economic power. So they are really creating the al-Sadr movement, but also al-Fadila party, which governed in Basra, one of the biggest oil fields in Iraq, that there's an internal struggle between these movement and parties and the government. Now, al-Sistani and Iran were trying to mediate between all these parties by saying, look, you are all Shiite, you have to find a compromise for the sake of Iraq, for the national security of Iraq, and for the sake of the biggest Shiite communities. So you have actually internal struggle over power, political power and economic interests within them, and beside the third part of this bloc is the Kurds, Talabani and Barzani parties. This is basically the governing class. But outside this governing class, you have different movement, organization, forces, secular, nationalists, lefties, and so on, against the occupation, against this kind of agreement, and against having military bases in Iraq, and against against the United States being part of this political struggle.
And what kind of strength are these extra parliamentary forces? Many of them who go back to the more days when the left-wing movement, the communist movement, was more powerful in Iraq, which is not that many years ago. Do they have any political strength? And that, as we said in the last segment, also goes to, do they have any guns? Because in Iraq, even if it's being discussed in parliament, everyone knows how many guns are backing up the parliamentary member.
Exactly. Yes, I would say you have a new development in Iraq since 2003, over which you don't have any media coverage, actually. Like, for the first time, I was saying last year, for the first time in history of Iraq, you have an autonomous independent union in Iraq, in Basra. And they started in May 2003. Now they have 10 of thousands. Yes, 10 of thousands of members and mobilization capabilities of like 250,000 people. And the new thing about these unions, they are not state or party affiliated like other unions in Iraq. And at the same time, they were and are against the privatization of oil in Iraq and against the occupation, against the security agreement. And you have such forces in Iraq, secular forces, lefties, actually, they can mobilize different communities in Iraq against the occupation and privatization, etc. So it's not only the Sadr movement or Fadiyya movement. Sometimes you have alliances between a movement with these trade unions and other secular forces and parties against the occupation and so on. And I think that the Iraqis now, since the development, especially this year, al-Maliki realized if he doesn't make any compromise with the secular segment of the Iraqi societies, with the Sadr movement, with some members of the regime, not Ba'athists, or maybe Ba'athists but not Saddamists, if he doesn't make compromise with them, he will not have functioning state institutions. They cannot satisfy the basic needs of the Iraqi people, and he will not have enough political capital to back him up against the United States in his negotiation of security agreement and so on, because he knows exactly that the U.S. have a lot of resources economically, financially, and militarily to destabilize his regimes. So this development in the last few months showed that the Iraqi, in a peaceful way, on all their different segments, can come together, work out and issue together statements
so would
for the future.
Maleki caught between an American rock and an Iranian hard place.
Exactly, and domestically.
And domestically.
Exactly.
In the American strategic mindset, there's always been the thinking that how the heck could we have done all this to hand, quote unquote, hand Iraq to Iran? But how realistic is that? Now you have, if there's one thing that's happening even amongst all this fighting amongst the Iraqi forces, on the whole they are standing up to the Americans in a way the Americans never expected. But would they also stand up to the Iranians the same way?
Yes, I would say yes, because most of them, even those Shiite political parties, if you look at the Southern movement, you will see they are nationals in Iraqi sense. Though they are Shiite, though they have good connections to Iran, not necessarily to the regime, but they have a connection to some part of the regimes, supported within Iran and so on. But they are nationals. So they are clear about these issues. They don't want to have any U.S. influence, but also no Iranian, Turkey, or whatever Syrian influence in Iraq. I am definitely sure about this issue.
Then the final point is this, is that Obama's always talked about, and he said this in Congress during the Petraeus report to Congress, he said, what if we left 30 or 40,000 troops there? Could we at least maintain the status quo? Which seemed to be his idea of what should happen in Iraq. One is, are the Iraqi government going to allow 30 or 40,000 American troops there? And are the Americans, and if the answer to that's no, are the Americans ready to really get out completely?
Yeah. Now this is also one of the problems of this agreement, of the so-called SOFA, because there are some paragraph there saying that the United States will help Iraq in technically, logistically, militarily, etc., and its war and struggle against terror and expatriates, etc. So that means you have some U.S. troops in Iraq, not necessarily combat troops, but troops, in logistical military sense, operative sense, helping the Iraqis. So in this sense, Obama was thinking to keep such troops, to train Iraqis, and to help them in technical, logistic sense, etc., and they will do the job. But the Iraqis are saying now, we don't want any U.S. troops, neither combat nor any kind of troops, because we are capable of taking care of our own securities. So the thing is, if the United States managed to sign this agreement, despite all the problem it has with this agreement, because they gave up all these issues like permanent U.S. bases in Iraq and so on. But they think in this way, since all these paragraphs in this document are so ambiguous that they can reinterpret the document a different way, they can sign a new agreement with the Iraqis even after 2011. But this issue, I would argue now, it will be settled out in Iraq, and the Iraqi will be against it. So even if the United States were thinking, tactically, let us sign this agreement despite all these deficits, etc. But then we have something to start with and to open up new spaces. It's also speculation.
So what's Obama's real choices then?
So Obama, the only choice...
January 20th he's there, and then January 31st is the election there. So sometime in that 10 or 11 days, although in reality they must be working on it now.
I think he said the first thing he's going to do once he is in his office is exactly this, to end the war in Iraq. That means he will have contact with the Iraqi government publicly and trying to, as he said, in 16th month of time, to withdraw the U.S. troops from Iraq.
And it sounds from what you're saying, there's really no reason why they can't just get the heck out of there.
Yes, this is the only thing.
Even from an American interest.
Yes, but the other thing, as you know, Paul, the state apparatuses, especially the security apparatuses in the United States, they have their own dynamic, their own logic, and their own strategies and so on. It's not necessarily they agree with what the president is saying. And they can create fait accomplis in Iraq to extend. And probably despite the good intention or will of the president, the new president, to end the occupation and the war, they create...
Well, after 8 years of so much, how are they going to give up their leverage on the oil fields?
Exactly. So this is the point. And I think this issue will be settled out in Iraq through resistance and not through negotiation or agreement.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We'll look forward to the 20th of Obama, and then we'll look forward even more to see, in terms of Iraq, the 31st. And see what happens in these elections. And as we get closer to the elections, I hope you'll come back and we'll talk about how things look.
Fine.
Thanks for joining us for our interviews, series of interviews with Sabah al-Nasseri. And again, the donate button, because without you clicking the donate button and giving money, we can't do these stories. Thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the power's in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars, and into environmental disaster. We think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Real hope means facing a complex reality. Your tax-deductible donation makes it possible. Please contribute. Visit therealnews.com.